The world of interior design is extremely diverse and always very interesting. And aside from architecture, it's the most complex and varied subject. You can be working with builders and contractors in the morning, or you can be choosing fabrics and teaspoons in the afternoon. But first, I think we need to define what interior design actually is. So, we're looking at space, light, form, texture, colour, furniture and objects. And once you have the ability to pull all those together, you have yourself an interior. Minimalism in interior design is often ridiculed and often misunderstood. This, for example, is a farmhouse by John Pawson. And to give you an example of how minimalism is so demanding, it's certainly not a cheap option and it's certainly not an easy option. We look at the pitch of the roof here, carries straight down, forms the main axis. You can then see where the wall and the window meet. The axis carries on through between the chairs right through to the edge of the room. That organises. Everything is subject to that central axis. The invisible things are, there are 3 air changes an hour. The floors are laser levelled by people who install laboratory floors, so they are absolutely flat. The walls are laser levelled, so they're absolutely vertical, and you may notice here a shadow line of 30 millimetres up and in. That's painted charcoal grey, and it makes the whole mass of the building appear to float. There is no really visible means of illumination either. There is one light there, which is a downlight shining onto the floor, and the only visible support structures are this fireplace with the chimney inside it and one support column there. Otherwise, everything's floating, everything's light. Minimal interior design is based on attention to detail. Without the details, there would be no design there at all. And a way to illustrate that is this little kitchen area here, because once the plug is in the socket, the cable comes out of there, the wood's flipped up, and all you see is a nice smooth cable coming through, and there's no indication of how the power actually reaches the cable. A softer form of minimalism is this Parisian Penthouse by Claudio. And to achieve that rather spectacular view of the Eiffel Tower, he was strapped to the outside of the building, 9 floors up, and edged his way along the parapet until he saw the perfect view of the Eiffel Tower. He then drew on the wall on the outside, and a window was cut to accommodate the view. Then it had to be balanced, so because he'd used these large chunks of stone, the fire was moved up to the top to balance the light, and that also gave a nod, an allusion, if you like, to flaming torches in castles. So we have the history going on there as well. And bear in mind that all this solid mass, these solid chunks of stone, are floating 30 mil above the floor. So there's a lot going on that's not immediately perceived. Moving into a slightly dilute version of minimalism here is an industrial building in New York, which has been converted into a single-person apartment. And I'm sure we're all aware of how small New York apartments can be, given the price of real estate. But this one really interacts with its surroundings. We've got the kitchen area here, and the extractor fan and overhob light echoes the support structure, the cast iron support structure there. All the kitchen equipment and utensils are kept in this storage wall here. Then we have a storage wall coming right from the front door, right the way through, and all those cupboards open. Then we've got a television area with in-wall speakers and a bespoke sofa pulling it all together. The whole effect is lightened by pickled oak parquet floor. So it's reinvigorating a 19th century industrial space, moving away from minimalism and more into the honesty of structure, which was given a nod to in the previous slide. This is a guest room in the attics of a large country house in England. And a country house attic would never have had such a fine door as that. Cabinet made perfect door. It would have had a few planks nailed together because nobody of any consequence, as they perceived it, would have gone up to the attics. It would have been just used for storage. But this has been pulled together very nicely. The beams have been stabilized in terms of insect infestation or rot, and they've been washed in with a lime-based paint which has been scrubbed in to bring the grain out. Then we've got a very interesting window treatment here for a very difficult window to dress indeed. And then we've got louver doors for the wardrobes and a 1930s chair to add balance to all this antiquity. Classical English decor is about allusions to the classical world, Greece, Rome, Egypt. And this is exemplified here by dental moulding. You can see there. Dental because it resembles teeth, but it also alludes to the cross beams, the support beams of a very basic dwelling. So those timbers would have gone across the top of the walls and would have supported the roof. Then we have ionic pilasters, which are subject to an extraordinarily complicated proportioning system. Pull those together, the detailed cornice, all the proportions are echoed in the fireplace, and then we start to furnish with pictures hung on chains which are covered in ribbons and rosettes. This would be the most important picture. The favourites were always hung low, so they could be looked at closely when seated. Then we have an Aubusson carpet from the late 17th, early 18th century, and then we have plain linens and chintzes outside. To my mind, the curtains are rather overdone for a room with such classical roots. A younger and more contemporary version of classic English decoration is this house. One thing to notice is the absence of colour. In fact, the view outside provides virtually the only colour other than the Gainsborough portrait that we have there. It actually, I think, looks better in the winter when the colours outside are exactly the same as the ones on the portrait. We can see that it's a lot more relaxed. The dental moulding, which is supposed to hold up the ceiling, they've removed the ceiling so that it now doesn't hold up anything, immediately rendering it ironic and contemporary. So that firmly places it within the contemporary sphere. Then we have an unfinished sofa here, which has got Hessian and leather on one side, Hessian on the other, but beautifully studded. Nice stud work on the Hessian side, so to prove that it's intentional. It's just more relaxed. And then the stairs lead up through into the dining room. The two columns supporting the picture rail lead into a small library, but it's clearly a very contemporary interior. Moving into a more eclectic kind of interior is this one, and this is at the top of a 3-storied staircase. So if you get a bit tired, you can have a little lie down on the landing. And this takes its cue, all the colours, all the proportions take their cue from these two rather beautiful full-size Elizabethan portraits. And the silk velvet covered daybeds are softened a little bit and made a little bit more casual by simple cotton rugs bought from Turkey, which are at the bottom of the daybeds, and the whole thing is made even more casual by the wide grouting on the simple Provençal terracotta tiling. So we go from Morocco in the ceiling, through Elizabethan England, through Ottoman daybeds and simple Turkish rugs into the south of France. So it's knowing how to pull that sort of thing together. The striped poles, by the way, are from Venice. In America, there's a fresher and more postmodern approach here by Kelly Wurstler. And Kelly Wurstler is very good with colour. She works by taking antique details, whether it's an Art Deco cinema railing, or in this case, we have a detail from a Lutyens chair enlarged and used to form the whole of the chair. We've got verre églomissé, cupboard doors here, and that involves taking the silvering off the back of a mirror and then replacing that with paint and then silver leaf on the back of that to give you this beautiful aged feeling. This is actually gilvering. It's a mixture of gold leaf and silver leaf which has been put on there. The two central panels are antique Indian. And then we've got porter's chairs from England here, so called because they were each side of the front door in a large country house, and they kept the drafts off the night porters whose job it was to make sure that nobody came in unannounced. 1960s and 70s light fittings from a villa in Capri, and the whole room is completely international and very, very tasteful, very well. It displays a good eye. I thought it'd be interesting to look at a neoclassical house here. This is Buscott Park in Oxfordshire, England, and it was redecorated in the 20th century by Alidad, an Egyptian-born decorator who's based in Paris, London and Cornwall. The silk damask on the walls were woven especially for the room to form the backdrop to a series of pre-Raphaelite paintings. That's the whole purpose of the room, is to present these paintings. So we start with that colour, then it works through all the different mouldings are picked out in delicate areas. There's a lilac-y colour introduced here and picked up in a paler version on the ceiling. But it just goes to show the detail of the cornices here then moving across the ceiling. It was designed by Robert Adam, genius at that sort of decoration. This is another room by Alidad. This time it's a private study, and it's only 5 years old, and it goes to show what can be done within a new build interior. First thing to do is to house all the air conditioning, the wiring, the cabling, the internet access and all that sort of thing. And that's hidden behind these walls. All the walls are false, and they contain all the necessary technology to make a comfortable interior. The grills are hidden between the dental moulding, so they're not visible. He's a master at hiding any sort of technology. Everything in here was woven for the room, from the curtains to the carpets to the upholstery fabrics, and the green marble is Irish. And everything takes its cue from this portrait hanging over the fire. By contrast, we have the head offices of Google, and this is called the Dead Zone. This is where their employees come for half an hour's break when it all gets too much living in virtual reality. This is normality to them. So it's a halfway house between the world they inhabit while they're at work and the world they inhabit while they're at home. So the colours are a mid-intensity, because when you're working in virtual reality all the time, when you go out into the real world, everything looks drab. So this is a sort of halfway house. So they come in here. As they approach the room, all the signals to the mobile phone and the tablet or laptop, they all die, and you're left here. You can relax in a bath full of foam blocks, watching the fish for half an hour and then return to work invigorated. It's an interesting approach to interior design. Here we have a low-budget, high-concept restaurant, which is equally popular with students and supermodels because it's reasonably priced, because not a fortune was spent on the interiors. It's in a student-y sort of area, but the high concept has meant that it's attracted a really fashionable crowd. And it's very simple. They just serve steak frites, those sorts of simple pleasant dishes. And we have the entrance there and the serving there. And the chandeliers were made by a blacksmith, and if you look, there's a single LED inside a wine bottle. So the whole chandeliers are made of wine bottles. This is a restaurant. It's actually 3 Michelin stars. It's in Paris. It's in an arcade, and it was designed by Philippe Starck, which in itself implies a certain budget level. The chairs are interesting. They're by Emeco in America, and they were produced for the US Navy in 1942 for the use on submarines. Starks elongated the legs and made them into bar stools and given them a very highly polished finish. These aren't tea towels hanging on the wall. They are wall lamps by lighting designer Ingo Maurer, as is this, which is an algorithm of a candle flame set into a circuit board, and that's the circuit board which looks like the candle there. All the accoutrements necessary for a restaurant are kept in the original cabinetry. It used to be a print works in the 18th century. This is an old net drying loft in Australia, and it's the headquarters for Couturier. And what she's done within there is provide the air conditioning. We have a fire here for the winter. The most important thing is this huge mirror, and when the curtains are drawn, you can see they stop there and they stop there. So when the client is standing, they just can see themselves with a backdrop of these two chairs, which for their friends or whoever's with them at the time. And we've got iconic furniture here, Warren Platner, Arnie Jacobsen. And we've got the same porter's chairs that were in the Kelly Worsler interior, but this time in dove grey silk velvet. But when the curtains are drawn, the outside world is excluded and the chandelier's there, and the couture gown is seen in the kind of interior that it would be worn, because you don't wear couture gowns in a net drying loft that often. This is a living wall by Patrick Blanc. And Patrick Blanc, if you Google him, you could see he's based in France, and he is a plant collector, really. He goes off, spends his holidays in the South American rainforest looking for rare and unusual plants. But he's developed a system whereby you can have a living wall, whether inside or outside. He's done a beautiful bank in Madrid. He's done a hotel in London. Some projects all over Europe. If you go on the website, you can see his work in some detail. This is a garden by Luciano Giubilei, who trained really in Florence, looking after the Villa Gambaraia historic gardens. That was a sort of casual apprenticeship almost. And then he realised that he really wanted to get involved with garden design, so he moved over to Britain and studied in Britain. He's a multiple gold Chelsea Award winner, and at the moment he's changing his style completely, and he's doing another casual apprenticeship, casual but by no means less intense for that, at Great Dixter, one of the great gardens in Britain. But this is a townhouse garden. It's in London. And his gardens are for people, he says, who don't really like to garden. But if you look, the trees all have the same diameter trunk, and they all have the same height canopy, and there's triple hedges, incredible use of lighting, very subtle use of material. The gravel is the same stone but crumbled. It's that level of detail when you get to specify all the tree trunk diameters. They were from a nursery just outside Antwerp, by the way, and the installation was carried out by Landform, who are one of the best garden construction companies in Europe. All the furniture is handmade or bespoke for that site, and on the opposite side, which is out of the shot, is the dining table. So this area is for cocktails, and then you cross over for dining. The lighting on the stairs is full on there for the photograph, but actually it's quite subtle, and it brings out the pale honey tones of the limestone. This is an image of a new genre coming through in interior design called Antiquarian Minimalism. And as the beginning slides, when we looked at minimalism there, there's very little furniture. The difference being with Antiquarian Minimalism is that it's all of museum quality. This panelling, for example, came from the Louvre when it was being restored in Paris. We have an antique French table there, used as a side table. There's an antique Italian daybed here. The boards were from a Pennsylvania farmhouse because they were the right width and they were the right depth, because if you've got deep boards, you get good shadow lines, as you can see there. It's Axel Vervoort, who's based in Antwerp, who designed it. Normally he works using single planks, but the room was just too wide to get those planks. So he's run a separation down the centre of the room, which perfectly divides it. There's a dressing area on this side, out of shot. Now, a working environment for interior design is often perceived, for those not involved, as being incredibly glamorous all the time. And actually, this is the reality. This is where you will be working. You'll be discussing things with contractors and builders, and it's where you've got to hang on to your concept as much as you possibly can, because all the people that you're working with will be trying to shave the concept a little bit. If you do it this way, it'll be a bit cheaper. If you do it this way, it'll be a bit easier. You have to cling on, and that's where your project management skills really come into their own. So this is your working environment, and as an interior designer, it's your job to turn it into that. That's the same interior 6 months later. So cling on to the concept, work with your builders and work with your construction people, but don't necessarily take notice of all that they say. Of course, you need to compromise sometimes, but there's precious little compromise on this. The NDA offers courses at diploma, foundation degree, BA Honours and Master's levels in interior design, garden design, curtain making and soft furnishings, retail design, heritage interior design and design for outdoor living. Thank you very much.